And now we're really excited to welcome two well-known folks within the ecosystem, Kristi and Sari, who have tremendous reputations of doing really good work in digital health technologies, and not only the development and the design, but also the ongoing adoption of what's going on in digital health. So welcome, both of you. Really glad to have you on the program. Thank you so much. We know how busy you both are. I really appreciate you joining. And with that, we'll hand the virtual microphone over to Kristi.
All right, thanks, Dan. Greatly appreciated, and welcome, Sari. Glad to have you here. As Dan mentioned, he did a great introduction of myself. I've been in healthcare for about 30 years. Have a strong passion for digital health, technology in health, inclusiveness, and helping with startups and startup medical device companies, and helping them find funding from the various opportunities that they can be involved in. And then also looking for collaborative partnering is something that we look at as well, not just for the financial aspect, but for the partnership aspect as well. So that's kind of a little bit about me. Sari, welcome to the platform. It's good to have you here. Can you give just kind of a brief introduction and background on your experience?
Of course, great to be here. I'm Sari Kaganoff. I'm the general manager of consulting at Rock Health. Rock Health is a digital health focused company that we've been in the space in digital health since 2010. We have both an advisory services group that works with enterprise companies and late stage startups on digital health strategy, and a venture fund that invests in early stage digital health startups. So we cover all bases there.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I think we'll start off with our first question, Sari, for you. And the first question is, what has the funding environment been like? We're kind of post-COVID in a way. And, VC capitalists have had their challenges in investing some of their money into new projects going forward into 2023. But how does 2022 compare with the prior years in digital health?
Yeah, that's a great question, and probably one that took all of us a little bit by surprise, as you'll see in a second. So we at Rock Health have been tracking the digital health venture funding in the US for over 10 years now. And, we look at a variety of different metrics relating to venture funding, but if you look at the overall digital health funding in the US in 2022, it was about $15.3 billion with a total of 572 deals. However, if you compare that, that sounds great, but if you would compare that to 2021 was a runaway year with 29.3 billion invested. So actually only slightly more than half in 2022 versus 21, which is kind of surprising. Yeah. That said, 2020 was 14.7 billion. So, it's more than that prior year. And if we look back a little bit more historically, 2019 was only around 8 billion. So obviously significantly more than pre-pandemic. We sort of look at this as a bit of a return to a higher level than previous, but definitely cresting over that spike that we saw in 2021. So it, maybe at first blush looks a little bit grim given it's almost half of what was last year or the prior year. But if you look at it in the longer run, it's actually still doing quite well as compared to previously.
Yeah, do you think that's going to level off? Yeah, I was going to say, do you think that's going to level off at all or just stay consistent?
Yeah, so I don't have a crystal ball, but I think it will level off and then continue back up in a growth trajectory. The exact timing is obviously hard to determine, but I don't think we're over as an industry. It's just more returning to the norm, or even actually elevated compared to norm post-pandemic. I think another thing that's interesting to note that's worth flagging is we also look at a number of other metrics, including the average deal size. And what's interesting there is that the average deal size has also decreased a bit. So we actually had an average deal size of around 27 million versus prior years was around 40 million last year. So also returning to the norm of size, I would say, versus 2021's average size.
Have you seen repeat investors, kind of come back into the digital health space, or are you seeing new investors that are dabbling or seeing the benefit of digital health in our healthcare world?
Yeah, and that's an interesting metric to track, and especially when you think about what is driving people into the market. Is it excitement, or, trends, or is it saying, you know what, I'm really
Innovation.
doubling down here, I've done this before. What we actually saw, interestingly, is in 2022, repeat investors held steady at around 700 repeat investors, which is the same as 2021, with the new investors slowing slightly. So we had about 440 versus the 590 in 2021, and 320 in 2022. So the good news is a lot of folks doubling down and saying, no, we're staying in, we're still focused, we're still doing this. A little bit of less new activity, but still quite a decent number. So seems like a lot of interest and optimism still.
Yeah. Are you seeing any increased ticking of the startup medical device companies, or what are the different areas of investment that you're seeing? Are they partnering? Are they collaborating? Are they looking for different ways to offer different solutions to get funding for a lot of these digital health startup companies?
Yeah. So one of the things we look at is what we call the value proposition. So what is the solution that the companies are offering? What we see in 2022 is that the first place value proposition was on-demand healthcare at $2.4 billion. So this would include things like telemedicine, prescription delivery, things like that. So that's still the first place, and it has been for many years now. So we're definitely seeing a lot of interest still there. Second place was what we call R&D catalysts. So this is companies that are supporting research and development, whether it's clinical trials or early stage research. That was in second place, which has also actually been at the top for a long time. This year was super interesting, though, where there are a couple of what I might call sleeper hits. And that is, companies that had not been in the top rankings or categories, I should say, that then came up the rankings recently. So one of those was non-clinical workflow, which was actually third place in 2022, but in historics had really been at like the 7th and 9th place.
Wow.
And so I think that's a real indication of a lot of the physician burnout and challenges with with kind of employment that the healthcare system is facing. So you see a lot of companies focusing on supporting those efforts with non-clinical workflow solutions. And the other thing that's quite interesting is care coordination, which jumped to the 6th place, but it was previously 13th. So we do see a lot more activity now in care coordination. So that'll be an interesting one to watch as well. If you look at clinical indications, which is another lens to consider, 2022 mental health was the #1 invested space, and again it has been for quite a while in the top. Cardiovascular was the second most funded clinical indication. Oncology was the 3rd, and notably diabetes actually dropped down from 2nd to 6th place. So it could be we're at a little bit at the end of a last year was quite a large investment cycle, so those companies may have enough funding for now. So quite interesting that we see a little bit of shifting around in what had historically been the priority focus areas.
Yeah. Were there any particular business models that were gaining more traction than others? Maybe you can kind of give us an idea on that perspective on the business models that are approaching Rock Health. What type of services are they looking for? And just kind of really take a couple seconds on that.
Yeah, of course. So we categorize business models in different ways. So mostly we look at who are they selling to? Are they selling to providers, to payers, to consumers, to pharma, med tech, et cetera? What was interesting, I think, this past year in 2022 is that those companies selling to providers was the lead. Actually, still 53% of companies that raise funding are still selling to providers. I'm curious to see how that plays out, because as we're all expecting it to be a little bit more challenging on the provider side, going forward with performance as it's been. And so we'll see how that continues. One thing that was quite notable is that the amount of companies selling to consumers actually dropped. So previously we had around 43% of companies selling to consumers, and this past year, only 37%. So it's still quite a high number, but you do drop. And I think part of that might be, rising costs of care and out-of-pocket costs rising, and consumers may be pulling back a little bit. At least that's the perception. So the companies are not targeting them quite as much. Another thing I thought was quite fascinating was the companies selling to employers took a pretty big dip as well, from 15% to 8%. And that's kind of interesting, because I do think that
that's a big jump.
Talk about digital health, people talk about Oh yeah, employer route. But I think this might be an indication that that business model is a little bit saturated, as employers already have a lot of solutions, are struggling with, employee burnout, turnaround, and may just not be as focused on adding additional solutions to their solution set. So that's kind of an interesting turn there.
Yeah, they're kind of cutting down on vendoring is what I call it. They're trying to kind of downsize what they're offering to their employees because it gets expensive to the employers as well. So as we wrap up our session here today, Sari, what were your takeaways from the JP Morgan conference this year? Kind of some last minute thoughts and kind of your, I won't say predictions, but maybe your thoughts on forward into 2023 and how you think our year is going to go.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I reflect on JP Morgan, I like to think about the mood and the sort of like not the words, but the vibe. And so I think that, yeah, exactly. And I think for me, it was a good note because I felt that the overall mood had shifted from, there was a bit of a panic, I would say, in Q4 that you would feel when you would talk to folks, and it shifted to more of like a buckle down and focus mode. So I felt like a lot of the perspective was around, we're going to be focusing on ROI, clinical effectiveness, revenue generating partnerships. We're going to be really serious, get down to business. So not the euphoria of maybe days past, but not the panic of like, oh my gosh, what's happening here?
The world's coming to an
I do
end.
think it's a positive note. Also a lot of opportunity for M&A, obviously, on both sides of the table, people paying attention to that. But I think, when you think about 2023, I do think of it as the year to get to work. Kind of.
We all have to get
there's been a lot of money, there's been a lot of talent, there's been a lot of investment in this space. And this, this is the year for really getting some results. Yeah. And so that's what
I agree. And I think really we have to ratchet back our blinders a little bit. So we take a more of a larger picture vision rather than just focusing on how our companies can contribute. How can we partner and collaborate with other companies to do more with less?
Exactly.
So appreciate your time, Sari. Thank you so much for your insights. It's been great. Yeah. And Stan's on. There we go.
It's fantastic. Great interview. Really appreciate it. If you can stay on for a few more minutes, again, Sari, you've been around digital health for a long time and have appreciated your collaboration going back to when you were with McKinsey and all the great work you were doing with Peter with that phenomenal firm. And I think one of the things that we've been trying to put our fingers on is whether or not we're seeing a roll up this year where a lot of digital health companies that didn't raise enough cash over the last couple of years are now going to be put together with other digital health companies that do have more cash, or if this is going to be where private equity and maybe some offshore funds come in and stand up a lot of digital health companies that do have revenues, that do have commercial models. What's your thought along those lines?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. I think it's the year of the roll up for sure. But I actually don't think it's a bad thing, right? Because I think when you hit a certain maturity point within every industry, in the beginning, entrepreneurs are taking risks. They're creating new things that have never been created before, but it's hard to reach scale. Not all those companies can reach scale, and the skill set required to reach scale is not the same. Also, you have a lot of point solutions that are targeting one specific challenge or issue or opportunity. But actually combining those point solutions can create something that's better for the stakeholders, whether it's the patients or the providers or payers or who knows. So I do think we will see consolidation, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's actually a healthy maturity of the industry saying, okay, we've had a lot of innovation and now we're going to turn that into scalable, more enterprise-sized offerings that can kind of survive a little bit better.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and you saw a lot of the announcements over the last couple of weeks, particularly the week of JPM, around Sanofi and Pfizer and a lot of these other major life science companies announcing big fund additions in the area of digital health. And walk us through a little bit about what impressed you the most about some of the funding events that have already occurred in 2023, either from the bigger funds announcing they're getting bigger, or in some funding events with some of the digital health startups that are in the ABC round and they're picking up sustainable cash to move forward.
Yeah. So first I'll comment on the trend you were mentioning of life science companies launching digital health funds. I think this is a very positive trend because I think for a long time, many of the life science companies were a little bit stuck in a pilot mode where let's dabble in the corners, try things out, see if this is real. I think now there's an acknowledgement like, yes, this is real. This is a part of the future. This is how we have to think about our businesses from A to Z. Everything from, research and development all the way through to patient engagement and, commercialization. And so seeing a lot of those companies take this more seriously and say, we're not just going to wait for the innovations to unfold and then later we'll tap into them, but saying, no, we want a front row seat. We want to really see what's happening. And we want to put dollars behind it. I think is a very positive development. So I think that's exciting. I think some of the other things that are pretty interesting are some of the what we call middle children. I don't know if you read that piece we wrote about 1.5 years ago about some of the mid-sized tech companies that have opportunities in healthcare. I think one that I noted just recently is Kroger announced a sort of new opportunity with, let me just remember exactly what it was, but, there's some really cool things that Kroger is doing there is clinical trial site network. And actually, if you look at it, Walgreens is doing the same, CVS is doing the same. You have this whole new world of clinical trial sites. But I think about what is the other opportunity, and I don't want to name names of companies, but what can Nike do in healthcare? I'm sure really more. They've done some, working on probably it. More, right? Yeah. Or what are the other companies out there that have great consumer research, have great audiences, great technology, and just bring that here into healthcare. So I think we'll see a lot of interesting partnerships and new technologies around that. And of course, the startups still going at it. There's plenty of exciting opportunities. We've seen, even like Babbly that Mariam was presenting before, there's a lot of more niche areas of focus where we have people looking at pediatrics, people looking at more neurodegenerative diseases, areas that, were historically a little bit more kind of less in focus. In the first wave was more like diabetes, cardiovascular, and now we're saying no, let's really start to focus on these other opportunity areas. So I think we'll see a lot there as well.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you both again. Kristi, great interview and great to have you on the program as always. And Sari, great to see you again. Looking forward to catching up soon. Thank you both.
Sounds great. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks, Sari.